Hi again, it's me. So, this video is gonna be a little bit different from my previous one. I don't really have a script this time around. Today, I wanted to recommend some books I've read in years past that I think you would like as well. The books I'm going to be discussing are mostly fantasy. There's a little bit of sci-fi. I have 4 with me. I will do some honorable mentions later on in the video, so that's gonna be a bit more quick fire tips, but let's get started. The first book I wanted to talk about is The Lies of Locke Lamora. It's written by Scott Lynch, and I think it's a really unique book. It's different from anything I've ever seen, actually. It is considered fantasy, but even if you're typically not into that kind of stuff, you might want to check this one out. So, The Lies of Locke Lamora is set in a unique fantasy world. The obvious inspiration for this book's setting is Venice, right around the Renaissance period. A lot of the aesthetic is very different from your typical fantasy story. The Lies of Locke Lamora is about the titular character. He is the leader of a gang that specializes in tricking nobles into investing large amounts of money in scam business opportunities. They do this by taking on false identities. This strategy isn't foolproof, as the city has a rigid structure of hierarchy between the different gangs, with, at the tippity top, one ultimate gang leader who controls almost every gang within the city and expects some sort of tax from them. So in order to keep the large amount of profit they make from scamming these nobles, they have to pretend to be low-ranking thugs. By doing this, they upset the fragile balance held together by a pact between the nobles and this gang boss that rules over the city. This means that a lot of people who are unaware of their true identities are trying to get to them. Normally, our protagonists are able to cleverly evade detection, but newcomers to the city will upset the balance even more, which will result in a lot of change coming to Camor. I'm not going to tell you too much about who will upset this balance and what exactly will happen, or anything relating to the plot, but if you like stories about bandits and the unique setting, you should definitely check out The Lies of Locke Lamora. So the next book I wanted to talk about is a little more classic fantasy, but it's still worth checking out. Even among the plethora of fantasy, it elevates itself by the extremely good writing by Patrick Rothfuss. And any fantasy fan should already have guessed what I'm going to recommend to you. It's The Name of the Wind. The first part in an, as of yet, unfinished trilogy, which I'm really looking forward to reading the last part of. The Name of the Wind is about this legendary bandit, magician, assassin called Kvothe, the Kingkiller, the Arcane. He has a bunch of titles which people refer to him by. He is probably the most well-known man alive in this fantasy world. Everyone thinks Kvothe is dead. He has orchestrated his own passing. This is because large bounties have been offered for his head. Kvothe has taken up the false identity of a simple bartender working in a small village, but he is eventually discovered by a scribe. This scribe, simply referred to as the Chronicler, wants to separate fact from fiction and reveal the whole truth behind Kvothe's past. Kvothe agrees to recount his life story over the span of 3 whole days. This is very odd, according to the Chronicler, because even men as old as 100 years have only needed a day to recount him every significant event. Kvothe, however, claims to have been through so much incredible things that 3 days is the only way he can tell him everything of importance. Throughout this book, we learn of Quote's origins, how he spent his childhood, and the tragedy that befell his parents. I'm not gonna tell you exactly what happened, but it's a fantasy story and he's the main character. You can figure it out. It also recounts his time at the University of the Arcane after spending a large part of his puberty as a beggar. At the university, Kvothe is taught sympathy. Sympathy is a magic system that is very well thought out. A lot of the magical elements in this story are very well thought out in advance, and the rules are properly set up so that nothing feels contrived or happens because the plot needs it to happen. Sympathy can be boiled down to a fictional science with rigid rules you can't break. This is very different from naming, the other type of magic that exists in this world. Naming is not very well understood and seems more like the magic told in legends. When it comes down to it, the Kingkiller Chronicles and The Name of the Wind is a story about stories. Stories play a huge part in the narrative of this trilogy, and it is beautifully written. Even if you don't like fantasy that much, you should definitely try to read the first book, The Name of the Wind, simply because the prose is magnificent. Patrick Rothfuss really did something unique with his writing. I don't have seen anyone else do this. It's masterfully written. Next up, I wanted to talk about something that could be considered a true fantasy epic. The other two books were just trilogies. They were kind of contained stories with a few main characters, but this is a big one. The Way of Kings in the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson. It's a long-spanning fantasy story with a ton of characters, a really good world building, complex magic, an entire history you slowly uncover as you discover more throughout the books. But the only downside, they're really f***ing long. They're thick boys. Each book is longer than the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a whole. Yes, it's doing something unique to the genre. It's taking it to a level of thought out detail, and even Sanderson's other series are kind of connected through this web, a bit like Stephen King's books, but it is magnificent, and the fact that Sanderson can put out so much is truly astounding. So, about The Way of Kings, well, it opens with Kaladin, a slave, being transported to what's known as the Shattered Plains. On these plains, a human kingdom is at war with a strange race of humanoids known as the Parshendi, whom they have recently discovered. After the assassination of their king, this kingdom has started a revenge conquest on the Parshendi, which has been going on for a couple of years now. I don't really know how to describe anything about this book without spoiling something amazing. You really just need to try reading it. I know it seems like a challenge. I know it kind of is, but it is absolutely worth it if you like big sprawling stories with lots of cool moments and enormously complex character arcs. Yeah, that's definitely a highlight for me. The characters are so well done. They all have complex backstories, and the world Sanderson is creating is incredibly unique. If you like fantasy, because this is something I would only recommend to a fantasy fan. Finally, I wanted to finish up with something a little more sci-fi, but you could definitely argue that it kind of blends the line between fantasy and sci-fi. It's a bit like what Star Wars did with a lot of planets and unique cultures or creatures. There aren't any aliens in this book. Well, there are alien plants and stuff like that, but it's a book about humanity, about the future of humanity, and about what we might become far, far, far into the future when our past on Earth has already been forgotten for generations. I'm talking about Dune. If the cover is to be believed, one of the greatest... not one. The greatest science fiction story ever written. It's about this desert planet Dune, or Arrakis. Arrakis is its official name. On this planet exists a resource which is the most valuable in the galaxy. It's called spice. And spice allows for longer lifespan and space travel. Without it, most of the human population would live pitifully short lives, and all intergalactic commerce would cease. It is the driving force behind every economy in the galaxy. Arrakis, or Dune, is being transferred from the Harkonnen house to the House Atreides. In the future, according to Frank Herbert, humanity's intergalactic empire wouldn't be able to be sustained through democratic means, simply due to its large size, so the feudal system would be reinstated. House Atreides is given Arrakis by the Padishah Emperor. This leads to a lot of envy from the previous owners, the House Harkonnen. They attempt and succeed in assassinating Duke Leto Atreides the First. Fans know why I mentioned that. So the Duke is assassinated, but his concubine and their son Paul escape into the desert, where they encounter the Fremen, native people of Arrakis. Paul seems to fulfill an ancient prophecy of the Fremen that someone would come and free them from the rule of outside planets. So in order to avenge his father and take back Arrakis, Paul will have to gain the Fremen's trust and lead them in an uprising against the oppressive Harkonnens, which could also land him control of the most valuable resource in the universe. Dune and the books after are some of the best I have ever read. Frank Herbert imagines a drastically different future for the human race than most sci-fi does. And it's really cool to see how he thinks humanity as a species might evolve due to our changing needs in an intergalactic society. There are a lot of different themes and subjects that the series touches on, especially towards the later books and mostly in God Emperor of Dune. It really asks profound questions about the nature of our race and how we might turn out in the future and what we might look like after millennia of traveling through the stars. Herbert has crafted a universe that feels real. So that was the main bulk of books I wanted to talk about. This video might seem a bit rambly, but I'm just really passionate about all of these works, and I would really like it if you at least check them out, read a few synopses or something, and see if it's something for you. Honorable mentions, gotta put some respect on the Wheel of Time. Great books, but a bit more cliche you could say, but definitely worth if you like fantasy. On the sci-fi, everything by Isaac Asimov, Hyperion also. The Foundation is really good. Yeah, but this was the main thing I wanted to talk about. Also check out maybe some other things Brandon Sanderson has written. He has YA novels. He has some superhero stuff that might be cool. It's a really interesting take. Definitely just don't give up on reading. It's a really fun thing to do. Even if you think that you might not like it because you've not really enjoyed books in the past. Maybe you like something totally different than me. That's fine. You should just keep looking and maybe you'll find something you're passionate about too. Yeah, that was kind of everything. Hope you still read from time to time. Bye.